All right, we have other breaking news tonight. The 72-hour ceasefire in the Middle East expires tomorrow morning, and now there's word that Hamas may not agree to extend it. The terror network says it's ready to resume a long war unless its demands are met by Israel. A Hamas spokesman listed the demands in an appearance on Arab TV today. Hamas is insisting a blockade against Gaza be lifted and all the crossings into Egypt and Israel are opened. At a rally today in Gaza City, another Hamas thug said, quote, "Our fingers are on the trigger and our rockets are trained on Tel Aviv." Israel's prime minister is warning this great battle must be stopped now. Sean Hannity got an exclusive interview with Bibi Netanyahu airing tonight. Here's a clip.
If in this great melee, in this great conflagration, this great battle, one of these militants, in this case the Shiite militants, backed by Iran, sponsored by Iran, if they have an Iranian nuclear umbrella, if Iran itself can intimidate the U.S. with intercontinental ballistic missiles carrying nuclear warheads, then we bring history into a different threshold altogether. It's not a spin. It's not a whim. It is a clinical diagnosis of a pathological movement that is sweeping our area, but will soon come to a theater near you. It has to be stopped now.
All right, so the rest of that interview is going to air tonight on Hannity at 10 p.m. Bob, weigh in on what we heard, both Hamas saying we're ready to fire and Netanyahu say you better not.
Well, I mean, if Hamas is saying that those are the conditions, there's not going to be, there's no way. I mean, there's no way Israel's going to lift the blockade on going into Gaza. And so it's a play on their part. My assumption is if they're going to continue it, that means they have enough arms to do it. But what Netanyahu is saying here is very important. I mean, what he's basically saying is, and I think, frankly, a little bit over the edge here when he says that Iran intimidates the United States because of an intercontinental ballistic missile. The Iranians are so far away from intercontinental ballistic missile. Greg's got a closer shot at that in his basement than the Iranians do right now. The question is, really, I mean, there's just, that's that kind of thing you say. Now, I can understand why he says it, because it gins up people's response to this country and gets people scared who don't follow it. But the idea that Iran's got intercontinental ballistic missile is silly.
All right, so the one thing that Israel is asking is to demilitarize Gaza, and if Hamas says we have our finger on the trigger, that's a pretty good indication they're not ready to lay down the weapons. Can we roll the sound? Everyone wants to weigh in on this one. Can we roll the sound of President Obama yesterday talking about the conflict? Listen.
No country would tolerate rockets being launched into their cities. And as a consequence, I have consistently supported Israel's right to defend itself. It is important to remember that Hamas acts extraordinarily irresponsibly when it is deliberately siting rocket launchers in population centers.
All yours, Greg.
Okay, saying Hamas acting irresponsibly, that's like describing hijackers as being rude. Built into that belief, a misguided belief, is that terrorists somehow can act responsibly, which is extraordinarily naive to keep using Obama's extraordinary. When you add the extraordinary to a word, it doesn't add value. It's a stark contrast, you were saying this, between this and Netanyahu. Here with Netanyahu, you have a man who puts a country before the world. With Obama, you have somebody who puts the world before the country.
Okay. When my 16-year-old forgets to walk freedom, that would be irresponsible, acting irresponsibly. Ange, your thoughts on an understatement, huh?
He couldn't say extraordinarily evil. I mean, he makes it sound like they forgot to fasten their seatbelts.
Yes.
Right? He has harsher rhetoric for Republicans. We've heard him that way. And I also think the disconnect between the president and his spokespeople or his cabinet secretaries is pretty glaring. I mean, Jen Psaki had harsher words for Israel by calling them their actions disgraceful over the weekend. We hear the Secretary of Defense talking about troops lining up at the border to invade Ukraine, and Obama saying sanctions are working. It's like he's not even talking to these people that work for him. But also, you know, I feel Netanyahu felt like he had to do what he had to do yesterday. And I don't think that he should come out and explain himself. It felt like he was justifying because there's so much pressure for them just trying to defend themselves. I think Israel has their friends, they have their enemies. Right now, they should focus on obliterating Hamas, and the U.S. should step aside and let them do it.
Dana, you made a very, very interesting observation, the difference between the two pressers.
Right, so there were two press conferences yesterday. I don't think they were set up to duel with one another because Netanyahu's press conference in Israel was in the morning. He did that press conference. He conducted it in English, and he spoke without notes and from the heart and with passion, because he has a responsibility of protecting his people from rockets that are being lobbed at him. In the meantime, President Obama's press conference, showing up an hour and 20 minutes late does not show that there's any sort of sense of urgency on your part, and there was no reason for the delay, and there wasn't. I'm not going to harp on the delay. I just think that it is symbolic.
It preempted our show.
That's true.
Well, I mean, that's the real tragedy.
Can I just also mention, I found today an article by Michael Duran of Mosaic, it was in Mosaic magazine. It's a really good description about President Obama's approach in the Middle East. And that is what started at the beginning, that instead of seeing the players in the Middle East at a rectangular table, he sees it as a round table. At a rectangular table, you have one side versus the other side. At a round table, you have everybody as an equal partner. So that is why I think you see the constant tensions. You have America's traditional allies all think, with Israel, that America has changed its position.
Well, our traditional allies are saying nothing. I mean, it's one thing for Netanyahu. Look, he can be very, very eloquent when you're getting bombed in your cities. Try to compare the two of them, I think, is not a fair comparison. And this, by the way, this table thing is interesting. You guys weren't born then, but the Vietnam War, they had to make a circular table to get everybody to come to the table.
Exactly. We have changed our position. We used to not negotiate with terrorist organizations. Now we have a president talking about returning to 67 borders, making these comments. He didn't sound like he believed it yesterday. Right. I mean, he really did not sound like he thinks Israel has the right to defend itself.
We